A fantastic Friday to each of you, and welcome to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. The Grizzlies take on the Minnesota Timberwolves in Minnesota. Was last night just a poor performance, an isolated poor performance, or did it reveal a few Achilles heels that could really get in the way of the Grizzlies' playoff success? That, plus another great game from Ziaire Williams, and previewing the Bulls game tomorrow night in Chicago on this edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Here we go.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, one and all, to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. My name's Shawn Coleman, credentialed media member with the Grizzlies. I've been writing for them for 4 years over at Grizzly Bear Blues. Your host here at Locked On Grizzlies, your Grizzlies every day. We want to thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen of the day. Find me at StatsSAC on Twitter. Find the show at Locked On Grizz, free on all platforms where you listen, and right here on YouTube as well. Hit that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Also, where you listen on for the podcast, and make sure that always you provide feedback, letting us know what content you love to hear. We're always wanting to provide content that is relevant to our listeners' preferences. So the Memphis Grizzlies were back in action last night against the Minnesota Timberwolves. And as I mentioned on yesterday's episode, listen, the Minnesota Timberwolves are just a tough matchup for the Memphis Grizzlies. You can find both, statistical reasons. You can find stylistic reasons as to why that is. It's just a simple fact. Just like the Grizzlies, I made this comparison before. Just like the Grizzlies are a thorn in the side of the Golden State Warriors, the Grizzlies always play the Warriors tough. The Timberwolves do the same thing. The Grizzlies have a very tough time stopping D'Angelo Russell, and even when they do an outstanding job overall of stopping Anthony Edwards as they did last night, the Timberwolves are always going to be resourceful and find different ways to still be in the game. And just unfortunately last night, the Grizzlies could not get enough stops to get the job done. But of course, the big story overall of the game was the fact that the game started out pretty good, right? The game started out in a positive light when Ziaire Williams was 4-4 from the field, including a 3 and 11 points in the first quarter, again showing just how comfortable and how productive he continues to be in that starting role. Now, obviously, that'll shift more towards a bench role once Dillon Brooks is back, but it again is highly encouraging. Ziaire Williams continues to prove that he is really starting to blossom in Taylor Jenkins' system, and now has scored 20 points again, multiple times this year. It is an outstanding performance from Ziaire Williams, especially when it comes to finding his scoring niche early in games. Of course, the Grizzlies got out to a big lead, but in the second quarter, the Minnesota Timberwolves were able to start having some effective play on defense, and they were able, with D'Angelo Russell starting to cook, they were able to find their groove. And then, of course, in the second half, it was some sloppy basketball from the Grizzlies. It unfortunately was just overall a very, very, poorly executed second half. It certainly didn't help that midway through the third quarter, Ja Morant obviously had his injury. Another unfortunate isolated incident where he slipped with his right foot, tried to overcompensate, I believe, with his left, slipped with one foot, tried to overcompensate with the other, and it looks like that he certainly injured his hip. Now, it did not look great when Ja Morant was on the sidelines getting attention. But, just like we've seen before, the man has adamantium in his veins, Wolverine, whatever you want to call it, right back out there in the fourth quarter. Now, I'll be honest, and I'll echo what many others have said. I don't necessarily think it was the smartest thing to put Ja Morant back out in the fourth quarter when he clearly was not at 100%. But then again, I don't blame the coaching staff and the Grizzlies, where if Ja says he's good, you trust him and you go with it. And he still was able to make at least a bit of a scoring impact to make the game go back and forth for much of the fourth quarter. But at the end of the day, the Grizzlies just could not get stops. D'Angelo Russell was by far the best player on the court in the second half of the game, and the Minnesota Timberwolves were able to win 119-114. So here's the big thing. Is this just the latest in just a chapter where you simply owe it up to the Grizzlies always having, or not always, but certainly this year, the Grizzlies just having trouble with the Minnesota Timberwolves? Is it simply that? Or did we get a glimpse in multiple ways of potential Achilles heels that really could prevent this season from being as special as the Grizzlies want it to be if some things are not corrected by the time the playoffs come? I truly feel that the answer is both. The Minnesota Timberwolves are a very tough matchup for the Memphis Grizzlies. Their defensive activity, in ways, as I mentioned on yesterday's podcast, their ability to create turnovers, their length, the ability that they have to throw different bodies at John Morant, they are very similar in ways to the Grizzlies. So the Timberwolves know the Grizzlies' tendencies, and they know that if they can prevent the Grizzlies from getting going from three, then basically the Grizzlies are playing a battle of twos versus threes because Minnesota is able to find their success from three. That a lot of times is how Minnesota is able to make games competitive against the Grizzlies. And that's exactly what happened last night. The Grizzlies were getting offensive rebounds at will. The Grizzlies were getting into the paint at will. The Grizzlies, once again, had over 40 free throw attempts last night. We'll discuss that more in just a second. So the Grizzlies, once again, against the Timberwolves, were able to get into the lane and dominate. But the problem is that the Timberwolves on the other end, they were able to pretty easily find their shots from three. 16 of 38 from three last night. And so the Grizzlies are basically trading off twos for threes on many possessions, and you're never going to win that battle. It especially doesn't help when Ja, Bane, and Jaren are a combined 18 for 55 from the field. So that's what stands out in that question that I posed to begin the show. Is this more of just a one-off situation where the Grizzlies just simply have a very tough matchup time in and time out against Minnesota? Or are there legitimate concerns from a game like this that have to be addressed by the time the playoffs come? On one hand, you're not usually going to see Ja, Bane, and Jaren go 18 for 55 while the Grizzlies give up 16 threes in a game. That's going to happen about 1% to 2% of the time. So you're not going to see that often. However, what you do consistently see, though, is if the Grizzlies struggle from three and they also struggle from the free throw line while not being able to defend the three, that absolutely could rear its ugly head in the playoffs and be the reason why the Grizzlies unfortunately suffer a first-round exit, despite the fact that many of us hope that's not the case. Despite the fact that many of us rightfully feel this team could clearly push a team in the second round of the playoffs. But the only way that they're going to be able to do it is if they can balance out their paint attack by having some sort of scoring outlet. Teams are going to be just fine letting the Grizzlies get into the paint. Teams are going to want to trade all day the Grizzlies getting into the paint and scoring, versus while on their end, they're able to shoot the three at will. If the Grizzlies are going to have struggle shooting the three and they're going to struggle defending the three, they just right now do not have the ability to overcome those struggles with enough successes in the paint, especially if they're not hitting free throws. So yes, there were a few positives from last night. Ziaire Williams' performance, as I mentioned on Twitter, Jaren Jackson Jr. has now consistently put together 20-point, 10 rebounds games. He's truly showing he could be a difference-making big on both ends of the court. But yes, this is a game that you're typically not going to see the best offensive players for the Grizzlies struggle this badly in a game. You're also typically not going to see the Grizzlies give up 16 threes, but you do get a glimpse at what could potentially prevent this season from being as special it can be for Memphis if they don't improve shooting the three, if they don't improve shooting free throws, if they don't improve defending the three. And you also potentially see that if the Minnesota Timberwolves wind up being our first round matchup, it's going to be a much tougher matchup than many might think on paper. The Timberwolves are a very tough out for the Grizzlies. I'm not saying we want to avoid them. I'm also not saying that we clearly want to play them, but I will say that the Timberwolves have a better ability than most to really point out the weaknesses in the Grizzlies, weaknesses that must be improved. And the biggest of all, in my opinion, right now is the free throw shooting. I'll get into that a bit more in just a second. But before we do that, I want to talk with you about Truebill. Truebill.com is a great opportunity for you to be able to really target those free subscriptions that unfortunately turn to unwanted costs. Don't let greedy corporations pocket your money. Download Truebill to take control of your subscription. On average, people save $720 per year with Truebill. Don't fall for subscription scams. Start canceling today at Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. Go right now to Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. Of course, we also want to remind you when it comes to your car parts, listen, we've had some crazy weather over the past month in the Mid-South, and that could do some wear and tear on your car. If that's the case for you, you want to check out RockAuto.com. It's an amazing place because within a few clicks of the button, you'll likely find what you'll need for the car parts that you need to replace. Regardless of the make and model or the part itself that you're needing, RockAuto.com is certainly going to be there for you as a great resource. It's also a family-owned business. They know that car parts typically fall out of budget, so they try to make things as economically friendly as possible. For over 20 years, they've been helping customers throughout their customer base get what they need when it comes to car parts. When you visit rockauto.com, let them know the Locked On Podcast Network sent you. Rockauto.com, amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the car parts you'll ever need. Visit rockauto.com today. Can't thank you enough for checking out the Locked On Grizzlies podcast as your first listen of the day. But don't forget to check out the Locked On NBA podcast. We've got roundtables galore around the Locked On NBA podcast network. All 30 teams represented in one of these different roundtables. I was in the top of the Western Conference roundtable, but a group look at how many teams around the NBA are looking for the rest of the season, plus what are the chances many teams have when it comes to the postseason. Check out the second half of the season roundtables from all 30 teams around the NBA on the Locked On NBA podcast, roundtable discussions for the rest of the season for all teams in the NBA. So the Grizzlies obviously had a struggle last night. And again, the whole thing is, yes, a lot of it you could just simply, allocate to the fact that it was just a one-time struggle of a game. Again, many factors from last night you're not typically going to see. The Stars struggling for Memphis on offense, them giving up 16 threes, them giving up 37 points to D'Angelo Russell. Sure, those things are not going to happen often. But there is a consistent and real, it is true. The Grizzlies do struggle against the Timberwolves. This is no, fluke. This is no trend that'll take care of itself. The Timberwolves are a very tough matchup for the Memphis Grizzlies. But overall, the thing that stands out last night that also, it's a concern right now, just being completely honest, is when it comes to the Grizzlies' ability to shoot free throws. Now, the reason why it is a concern is because the Grizzlies actually are doing very well getting to the free throw line. When you look at the Memphis Grizzlies right now when it comes to their offense, as we mentioned, they are very much struggling to shoot the three. They are in the bottom 7 of the league so far this year when it comes to three-point percentage and three-pointers made per game. We've unfortunately seen them kind of drop back down. The Grizzlies have actually regressed a bit from where they were last year. It's an unfortunate trend. It just simply is something that has not worked out so far, and you hope that the Grizzlies will be able to correct that approach by the time the playoffs come. However, the Grizzlies, despite their struggles from three, they actually have figured out how to become so resourceful in the paint that there's multiple ways that they truly could overcome their struggles from three if they just would simply convert their chances. Check this out. The Memphis Grizzlies shot 40 free throws again last night. They now lead the NBA in terms of the total amount of games this season in which a team has 40 or more free throw attempts in a game with 4. And they've done that over the past month. As a matter of fact, since January 15th, the Grizzlies lead the NBA in free throw attempts per game, while also while being third in the league in free throws made per game. And that's how they're able to combat and they're able to continue winning despite the fact that they're struggling from three. The Grizzlies, number one, are so resourceful on their initial shots in the paint, and they're getting so many opportunities based off offensive rebounds, based off pushing the pace, based off creating turnovers. They're getting so many initial opportunities against other teams that their overall, difference and their overall ability to have significantly more possessions than other teams in games, that's one way they're able to overcome their struggles from three. But now consider the fact that despite those initial shots, the Grizzlies are getting more free open shots at the basket than anyone in terms of free throws. The problem is that the Grizzlies are 29th in free throw percentage. Again, since January 15th, number one in free throw attempts per game, third in free throws made per game, but 29th in free throw percentage. What it comes down to, the Grizzlies had their avenue to overcome their struggle shooting the three. They're just not taking advantage of it. And obviously, it correlates that if the Grizzlies are struggling to shoot the three, they're also going to struggle from the free throw line. But that's what's at times getting to be a bit frustrating. And I don't mean that in a negative light. It just is simply the case. We see the Grizzlies make 9, 10, 11 threes on the night, shooting 33 to 35%, what have you. And then they're in these close games late. And yes, they still win many of them. Yes, they still win many of them just simply due to the quantity of their free throws. But if they could just make 3 to 4 more free throws per game, if they could just get closer to 75% to 80% shooting from the free throw line on a consistent basis, they'll see some of these close games, like last night, result in wins more often than not. And that's what's going to happen for the Grizzlies to truly try to make a push for that second position in the West. Again, just because the Grizzlies lost last night, and they do have a couple of tough matchups coming up against the Bulls and the Celtics. After that, there clearly is the opportunity for the Grizzlies to make a push towards the Warriors for that second spot in the West with how manageable the Grizzlies' schedule is coming up for the first 3 weeks in March. But the only way the Grizzlies are going to take advantage of that is by taking advantage of their opportunities. They have done what they needed to do. They are the most resourceful team in the paint in the NBA, to the point of being historical when it comes to their consistency of being resourceful. And that's just on the initial shots. Now you back up that productivity with the fact that they're getting more extra shots at the free throw line than any team in the NBA. And they need it more than any team in the NBA because of how much they're struggling from three, but they consistently do not take full advantage of it. And that's why I do consider last night to be a bit of a revelation of the impact of the Grizzlies' Achilles heel, fatal flaw, whatever you might want to call it. It's certainly something that can improve. But if we get to the playoffs, and the Grizzlies are still struggling shooting the three, but yet they're having the impact that they can get on obviously having significantly more possessions than their playoff opponent per game. But they don't take advantage of the free throw opportunities that come from those extra possessions. If the Grizzlies are struggling shooting the three and struggling shooting free throws, that puts so much pressure on their defense. And if the defense falters, if the defense is not playing like it can at a top 5 level, game in and game out, it's going to be tough for the Grizzlies to advance. It absolutely is. If the Grizzlies continue to shoot the three like a bottom 5 team, and they continue to shoot free throws like a bottom 5 team, unless they counter that by playing like a top 5 defense, they're going to find struggles in the playoffs. That's absolutely the truth. I feel adjustments can be made. I feel this team certainly can improve. There's no doubt about that. At the end of the day, they're still 41-20. Like last night wasn't the sky falling down on the Grizzlies season. Last night wasn't a definition of how you stop the Grizzlies blueprint, or it didn't significantly change the Grizzlies' chances of getting out of the first round. I think the Grizzlies still survive the first round this year and go to the second round with a chance to move further. But the only way that they're going to confidently be able to advance in the playoffs is if they do one of two things. They either figure out how to shoot the three well, or they figure out how to make their free throws. And I know that it's correlated. I know that it's connected, that with the fact that they struggle from three is one of the reasons why they struggle from the free throw line. But at the end of the day, if this team truly wants to make the most of its season, the writing is on the wall of how they can do that. They've got to convert the open opportunities that they earn, whether it be from the free throw line from getting fouled, or it be from having good spacing out for high percentage looks from three, because teams have collapsed so much in the paint to stop Ja and company. The Grizzlies are going to have to do a better job of converting those looks, because if they continue to struggle and they're not playing at a top 5 defensive level, again, they're going to find it very, very hard to be able to get the consistency they need to beat another playoff team and move on in the playoffs. I don't mean to be a negative Nelly. Don't mean to be a Debbie Downer. Not in any way, shape, or form trying to overanalyze or think too much from one game. But I do think that you got a very good example of where the Grizzlies have to improve for them to have the best chance of making this a special season. But of course, the matchups don't get any easier. As we go from Minnesota, we stay in the Midwest and we head to Chicago against a team that, yes, the Grizzlies handled pretty easily on Martin Luther King Day, but there's a young gentleman by the name of Zach LaVine who is back in action for the Bulls, and he can make all the difference in the world. But it's some other Bulls who certainly are stepping up as well to support LaVine and DeMar DeRozan. The Grizzlies are going to have to be conscientious of as well. We'll discuss that in just a moment. But before we do, let's talk about Built Bar. Have it in the morning for breakfast, in the afternoon as a snack. But if you go to Built.com right now, you put in the promo code LOCKED15, you'll get 15% off your next order from Built Bar. Over 18 different flavors, and any of them are going to be make your day better. Again, go to Built.com, put in the promo code LOCKED15, and get 15% off your next order from Built Bar. Next week on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast, we'll continue, obviously, to discuss the Grizzlies' return to play. Games against the Spurs, games against the Celtics, looking at how the Grizzlies have been able to fare in two tough matchups against the Timberwolves and Bulls to start the second half of the season, plus what they need to do to be successful as they head into March. That and much more on next week's editions of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. So the Grizzlies head to Chicago, and for the second time this year, they face off against the Chicago Bulls, a team in Chicago who's had to overcome its own struggles, its own absences, but has done exceptionally well. And here's the thing about it, guys. The thing is right now is, again, I mentioned it in several different places. For me, DeMar DeRozan is clearly, like John Morant, is a clear top 4, 5, 6 MVP candidate in the league with how well he's played this year. He is on an absolute tear. I believe averaging 38 points per game over his last 8 games. It's an even better tear, and I don't mean anything like that insulting towards Ja, but just statistically, it's an even more impressive tear than when Ja had his 7 straight games of scoring 30 more points going from the end of January into February. DeMar DeRozan has just put the Bulls on his back and has absolutely delivered time and time again. And now the Bulls have Zach LaVine back. And the thing is the Bulls aren't even at full strength. It's still a few weeks before they have Alex Caruso. It's still a few weeks before they have Lonzo Ball. They may get Patrick Williams back. But you have young players, especially players like Ayo Dosunmu, who has stepped up and has absolutely delivered in the absence of Ball and Caruso, and has allowed for the Bulls to have a reliable third option out on the perimeter to make life tough for their opponents. Not to mention, Ayo is a very, very good defensive player. He did a very good job at times on John Morant in that Martin Luther King game. And so that's what stands out for tomorrow's game against the Bulls. It's simple, and it's very, very simple, and it's going to remain simple. If the Grizzlies are going to win tomorrow night's game, they're either going to need for Ja to be in a good enough spot to match DeMar DeRozan's scoring output, or the Grizzlies are going to have to figure out how to find their stroke from 3 to be able to get the job done. Because that is something that the Grizzlies can do. Against the Bulls, the Grizzlies can find success shooting the 3. But if Io and company do a good job against DeMar DeRozan, the Grizzlies are going to have to confidently make their threes. They're going to have to confidently make their free throws in order to find success. And that's especially true if they can't shut down DeMar DeRozan. Now, you're not going to shut him down. You're barely going to contain him. But the other key is now with Zach LaVine back, who scored 20 points of his own last night against the Hawks in his first game back in quite a while. If the Grizzlies were to focus on trying to stop DeMar DeRozan, you now have to make sure you don't let Zach LaVine get hot from three. That's why the Bulls have done such a good job this year at times, is that combination works so well off each other. DeMar DeRozan getting to the free throw line, his proficiency from the mid-range, and then you've got Zach LaVine. When too much attention is paid to DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine's ability from three is going to shine through. So another tough matchup, and it's similar to the Timberwolves game, right? The Grizzlies did a very good job keeping Anthony Edwards quiet, but unfortunately, the pressure from D'Angelo Russell and from Karl Anthony Towns, especially from beyond the arc, if you put the attention on one player to stop, these other options that the Timberwolves had, they were able to feast. And that's what the Grizzlies have to avoid. They have to avoid putting so much attention on trying to stop one source, they forget about another. And the Grizzlies are smart enough as a team defense to be able to do it. But these stretches of games also remind you just how much the Grizzlies are missing Dillon Brooks. They're missing the key ability to just put Dillon on one of those two guys at one point during any defensive possession that he's on the court, and then telling the rest of the defense simply to focus on the other guy. Because if you try to stop DeMar, if you then try to stop LaVine, then Io or other players could step up and deliver it as well. Nikola Vucevic could certainly cause havoc down low. So the Grizzlies, once again, are facing a similar situation in the Bulls that they just faced against the Timberwolves, and it's to an even higher degree. There are so many different offensive options that the Bulls can utilize right now that are playing well, that if the Grizzlies focus on one, they have to make sure to not get burned by the other. But if the Grizzlies can figure out a way to at least contain the overall offensive attack of the Bulls, the next thing that they can do is take advantage of the opportunity of not only should they get some open looks from three, but continuing to find success in the paint, offensive rebounds, but hitting their free throws is obviously going to be key. So it's a great opportunity tomorrow night for the Grizzlies to take what occurred on Thursday, just get past what happened, know that a lot of the struggles from Thursday night will not commonly happen, but take what happened on Thursday night and they have an immediate ability to improve upon that on Saturday. If Jaren Jackson Jr. wants to go for 20 points and 10 rebounds again, hell yeah. If Ziaire Williams wants to shoot well from three and have another double-digit first quarter to support John Bain, hell yeah. If Bain wants to step out as being the better performer over LaVine, if Ja and Bain once again want to show they have the ability to step up on the road to face off against one of the better combinations in the NBA, hell yeah. There's plenty of ways, and there are plenty of capable ways the Grizzlies can get a job done, but it's a really good opportunity for the Grizzlies after some of the weaknesses in this Grizzlies team really showed up on Thursday. It's a great opportunity for the Grizzlies to bounce back and show that they can make adjustments when they need to against a very good team on Saturday night against the Bulls. Of course, we'll be back with you on Monday talking about all things Grizzlies and Bulls. It's going to be a lot of fun. Certainly hope that the Grizzlies are going to be able to get the job done. At the end of the day, the other great thing again that stands out is it's a second straight opportunity for the Grizzlies to be able, for Ja Morant and Bain to share the court with one of the premier duos in the league. They performed well against those duos so far this season. Hopefully they'll be able to do that again tomorrow night. Can't thank you enough for joining us here on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the game. Go Grizzlies, and we'll talk to you soon here on Locked On Grizzlies podcast.